Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Swedenborg Hall, to this evening's discussion about Odesa, one of Ukraine's most important and fascinating cities. This event is co-organised between the Ukrainian Institute London and University College London School of Slavonic and East European Studies, and supported by the British Academy. My name is Louis Blacker, and I'm an Associate Professor of Ukrainian and East European Culture at UCL. And I'm really excited to have four amazing panelists with me this evening to discuss Odesa. They are starting from the far side over there, Julian Evans, a journalist and a writer who has been writing about Odesa for more than 13 years. His book, Undefeatable, Odesa in Love and War, has just been published by Scotland Street Press. And I really do recommend it to you. It's a really fascinating mix of memoir, history, politics, description of the war, intertwining Julian's kind of personal relationship with the city of Odesa, with the politics and the history. And it's really a brilliant reading. Luke Harding has called it a brilliant portrait of a country and a city under attack. And we do have copies at the back of the room for you to buy at the end of the event. Also here, at the opposite end of the panel, is Oksana Dolgopolova, Professor of History at the Kiev School of Economics, Curator of the Past Future Art, Memory and Culture platform. And Oksana's research covers the new Ukrainian language of commemoration in the context of the war. And also, crucially for us, Odesa's image in contemporary Ukrainian memory entrepreneurship. She's curated many projects and exhibitions in Ukraine, but also across Europe. Back on the other side of the panel, we have Olga Sidoroshkina, who's a film curator, cultural manager, who's worked in Ukraine and internationally, including at the Odesa International Film Festival and also the Green Theatre in Odesa. She is currently a film curator for DocuDays, the DocuDays Festival, Documentary Film Festival in Ukraine, and also program curator for the Ukrainian Institute London, and someone who many of you know. She's also the co-founder of Porch, which is a cultural festival that she launched during the full-scale invasion. And last but very much not least is Ivan Kozlenko. He's a film scholar, curator, a cultural manager. He is the founder of the Mute Nights Silent Film Festival in Odesa, and also formerly the director of the Dovzhenko Center, Ukraine's main film archive. And under his leadership, it turned into one of Ukraine's major cultural institutions. And during his time there, also they managed to restore more than 70 Ukrainian films, many of which have been thought to be virtually lost to us. He's curated film programs in Germany, Korea, and Italy, as well as in Ukraine, and also edited numerous books on Ukrainian cinema, and also won the BBC Ukrainian Book of the Year prize for his novel Tangier in 2017.
I did,
yeah. He was shortlisted. He should have won. My apologies. But you should definitely read them. So a really diverse and rich panel of people with different relationships with Odesa, who can provide us with different perspectives on its culture, on its history, its past, and its present. And we'll have a lot to say, but I want to start with a few associations with about Odesa. Odesa is a place with many faces, which looks different if you're in Ukraine, looks to how it looks if you're in Russia, of course, to how it looks if you're in the West. I think it can look different if you're inside Odesa than it does to other places in Ukraine. So I'm interested to know, first of all, what the panel's associations are with Odesa. If I can ask you before we get into the long, eloquent answers, single word associations with Odesa. But I'm going to come to you after, and I'm going to ask our audience, when I say the word Odesa to you, what's the first thing that comes to your mind?
Glamour.
Glamour. Grammar, okay, yes. This comes up in Julian's book, actually.
New York.
New York, yes, because there's a connection, definitely, there's a little Odesa.
Music.
Music, absolutely.
Culture.
Culture, which we will definitely come to talk about. Yeah. Humor, absolutely. Again? Vibrancy, yeah. Sea, of course, it's a port city, which is extremely important. Seafood. Yeah, when there's sea, there's seafood. Absolutely. Okay, so yeah, lots and lots of different associations with Odesa, all of them pretty much positive, I would say. Let's go to our panel then. Maybe I can start with you, Julian. What's the one word to you that sums up Odesa?
Not one word, it's just like a city through the back of the wardrobe.
Through the back of the wardrobe, absolutely, yeah. You use that metaphor in your book as well. It's really, that's a great description, actually. Yeah. Well, how about you?
I would describe her as a controversial city.
Controversial city, okay. And I hope we're going to get onto the controversies today, yeah? Home, okay. Yeah, this is important, especially now when so many people displaced from Odesa and many other cities. Odesan, how about you?
Home for me too.
Home as well, okay. Yeah, no, I'm glad we got into home. So I'm going to stay with you now, Oksana, and talk about something that actually did not come up so much in the associations, and that is history. Odesa's history, its past, and how it influences the present, I guess, because this is really where your fields of expertise intersect. We have history and memory on the one hand, and we have Odesa on the other hand. It's a place which is a very complicated past. It's a city with an imperial past, with a Soviet past, with a Ukrainian past, a Russian past, a Jewish past, a Greek past, you know. We could list them, go on and on with different layers of this very complicated palimpsest. How would you characterize Odesa's relationship with its past today?
Oh, thank you for this question. The question is really complicated, and the relations of contemporary Odesa with its past now is slightly nervous, yes, because Odesa for many years and for many decades lived very calmly in this myth of a city near the sea, commercial city, and that's why a very tolerant city. So in Odesa, people can negotiate and can agree in each question. So on background are all pogroms which we have in our history. It's a myth of multiculturalism and cosmopolitan past. And if you will ask each person in the street, the first association, it will be cosmopolitan, multicultural city, which was created at the end of 18th century, and it such historically happened that it is Russian-speaking. So this contradiction, people don't notice as a rule. Multicultural, multilingual, and historically Russian-speaking. So it is a problem which appeared visible for people in Odesa now, because this mythical city, which was created by Russian Empire, now are attacked by Russia. And so I'm sure that Ivan will tell about it more than me. That Odesa is object of constant manipulations and put a great amount of money to create films and books and different projects to prove that Odesa is Russian city. And Odesa in 2014 proved that it's not Russian city. Odesa don't want to be in Russia, and not in 2022, but in 2014. And now people put before themselves the question what to do with our imperial heritage. And we have now in Odesa, regrettably, the developed concept of the imperial heritage. Because when we speak about imperial heritage, what about we speak? We speak about Russian Empire, Soviet Empire, but what about Ottoman Empire? And if we take all these perspectives, not only Russian and Soviet Empire, but Ottoman Empire, and taking in consideration the great Greek colonization, it's not imperial colonization, but it's colonization. So in this focus, in this optics, we find the new way of thinking about Odesa. And if we are talking about Ottoman Empire, for example, which absolutely erased it from collective memory, and it was deliberate action of Russian Empire. It was empty space. So they say it was empty space, it was nothing, it was desert. And if we even will remind the poems which we know very good. So Pushkin, yes, Евгений Онегин, when he say, все хорошо, но дело в том, что степь нагая тут кругом. It's all wonderful in Odesa, but the naked steppe is around. For Russian perspective, it was very important message. It was desert here, and we came and created the flourished city. Now, when we one more notion for Ukrainians, the steppe is not naked, never. Steppe is a cradle. It's a cradle of civilization. It's a cradle of life, and it's so. Now, when we work with our past, with the past of the region, we see how productive it is to deepen this history. And now we can say that when Russian Empire came to the northern Black Sea region, on this territory existed 5 cities and 50 villages in Odesa region. And when Russian Empire came, only 2 cities left. And what about the others? Why desert appeared here? Because Russia came. And when we see this perspective, we see other aspects of living of people here. And when we think about this part of imperial heritage, we can speak about Odesa not as about south of Russia, but as about of north of Mediterranean world. And when we look in this perspective, it's absolutely other narration. We can tell absolutely other story. And it's not false story, it's a true story, really. Maybe I will stop here because it's a common frame.
So yeah, absolutely. This idea of kind of offering alternatives to the framework of the Russian imperial narrative, the historical narrative of Odesa. But this narrative and the way it's being challenged is very often when we write about and read about Odesa in the West, definitely one of the first things that you'll read about in any newspaper article is about, for example, the monument to Catherine, which was taken down in 2022, I think. It's kind of lying on its side in the courtyard of the museum at the moment. This question of monuments is always very interesting for journalists, for sure, and for academics like us. Should there be a monument to Catherine? Should there be a monument to Pushkin? Should there be a monument to Babur? All of these different figures which are now being reassessed and in the context of the decolonization policies and all of that stuff. How do you see, from inside Odesa, are these monuments, how important are they to people there? And how do you see this problem as being solved in Odesa? I know that's a difficult question.
All the problems of some kind can be solved only through discussion and free and open conversation. So no way. I understand that now people in Odesa, as in all Ukraine, are quite nervous, and sometimes it's entails the desire to do something. Speaking about the monument to Ekaterina, I can say that it was a problematic monument from the moment of its erection in
2010. So it's not an old monument.
Yeah, it's not.
It's not an old monument. It's a replica, not even a copy of a monument which was created by Edwards at the beginning of 20th century. It was not. The remnants of this monument lied somewhere in the backyard of the Museum of Local History, and it's a new monument, so it's of no historic value, and so it's okay. And for all these years, from 2010, it was a place of quarrels, and it was a constant police point near the monument because it was in danger constantly. But in 2022, it was raised easily. It was not public protest or something. This monument was quite easily removed because the perspective was changed. If we speak about other monuments, it's the more complicated question.
Yeah, and I want to talk about some of the other monuments as well. One of the ones that's often appears is Isaac Babur, so the famous Russian language Jewish Odesan writer, who is this very complicated figure who is difficult to kind of slot into any easy category. And when you have this kind of battles over the past, this war over the past, people have a hard time deciding which side is he on, and which is he on our side or the other side. Obviously, the past kind of resists these kind of interpretations. And this is something we can say about lots of cultural figures from Odesa. And these cultural figures are very much part of these memory wars, Babur and others. And this is how I wanted to come onto you guys, to Ivan and Oya, to speak specifically about culture. We've already mentioned Pushkin, we've already mentioned Babur. People, again, the Western perspective, these are probably the two names that come up and the ones that people know. But obviously the cultural history of Odesa is much more than this. It's literature in many different languages, in Russian, Ukrainian, and Yiddish, and many other languages. It's also cinema, which is something that both of you guys work on. So my question maybe, Ivan, to you first, is how do you assess these kind of battles over the cultural figures of the past? Is it something which is in some ways useful for society, or perhaps the opposite? And what's missing from the picture?
I mean, I think it should be like this. People should, discuss these topics. But the problem is that maybe the wartime is not the best time to discuss them, because people are galvanized with the fear, with the hatred, with everything that doesn't give like a cold, brain to work. So I would say that, as for me, probably it's better to wait a bit, to postpone it for afterward period, and then to discuss it freely. I mean, it's still free discussion now, but it's not productive in any way. And I would focus now more on Odesa Russophone literature, which is interesting and also a very important point, because, as you mentioned, Babel is an emblematic figure, but there are a lot of other Russophone writers who were born, but it's not only about their origins, it's about the topics of their novels, of their texts. So their texts were dedicated to Odesa, right? It's not only that they were born there and they moved somewhere. Yeah, they did, they moved, but still, even in Moscow, they were keeping writing about Odesa. And it's something very important. So it meant that they were devoted to this place. And what's important for me, when we speak about Russophone or Russian language literature, I wouldn't call it Russian language, actually. Babel didn't write in Russian language. Babel wrote in Odesa, let's say Odesa dialect of Russian language, which is not literature Russian language. So he was working in a way for decentralizing of imperial language, which is interesting topic, because he was including Yiddish, Ukrainian, Polish words in a way, dissolving the centralized Russian imperial language. And this, let's call it Odesa language, because people still spoke this language. My grandmama, she spoke this very unusual language, and I don't want this language to be vanished. When you treat those writers as Russian, you assume that they should be excluded from Ukrainian culture, while I think that they have to be included into Ukrainian culture and should be appropriated, because Russian culture appropriated them. They didn't really belong to Russian culture. They belong to some kind of local Odesa culture, very unique, very authentic, and they were appropriated by imperial culture. So Ukraine can and should do, and naturally has more rights to do so, to appropriate them into the body of Ukrainian cultures. So for me, Babel, first of all, the monument to Babel is also quite new. So it's not about heritage, it's more about generational question, I would say. For new generation, he's not a big figure. Unfortunately, they don't read that. But for the previous generation, and the campaign to erect this monument was held by his daughter and like other people who knew him personally, and others from Odesa culture elites who cherished him as a great writer. But I don't think it's about monuments. The question is is there a place for Babel in Ukraine? Is there a place for Babel in Odessa? Not physical place necessarily, but some kind of place. And I think that the way we answer this question is the way we, identify ourselves, and it's very crucial for self-identification, not only of Odessans, but also for Ukrainians, because Odessans are Ukrainians.
Like you say, the Russian language literature or Odesan language literature from Odessa doesn't necessarily belong to the empire just because it's in Russian, but this literature is known to the world because it's known to the world because it's been translated from Russian. Right?
From semi-Russian.
From semi-Russian, okay, but it could be translated by a translator of Russian language. And it's included in the kind of, let's say, the Western canon of Russian literature. Yeah, it's simplified as Babel is a Russian writer. Yeah? These complications are not really understood so well. But it does come to the wider world because of that imperial connection. Because the wider world, there are people who can translate from the imperial language into English, another imperial language. The same we can say of Ukrainian writers from Odessa. So we can think of somebody like Yuri Yanovsky and his novel The Shipbuilder, which is an amazing novel about the 1920s cinema industry in Odessa, but it's completely unknown to the outside world. So I guess when we talk about claiming the Russian language or the Odesan Russian language literature and keeping it in the canon, but there's also this problem of the Ukrainian Odesan literature which has been excluded from so long.
I mean, it really was excluded, but it's not anymore excluded. So my point is that there is plenty of space within the city to locate everyone, including Mickiewicz, for instance, who also worked and wrote there. So my point is, when I was a child, it was quite a challenge for me as a Ukrainian to feel as a minority in the city. I knew that I was Ukrainian. I discovered that I was Ukrainian when I was 5 or 6 years, and it was quite a discovery because it wasn't the topic that we were discussing in our family. I just heard the Ukrainian language on television, and I asked my father what language do they speak, and he said they speak our language, which was Ukrainian. And I was like, oh wow, our language is Ukrainian. That's interesting. And so for me, it was like a very early, understanding that I was Ukrainian, but I felt this pressure of Russian culture and Russian presence in the city. But it never was a point for me that Russian culture or local variation of Russian culture, let's call it this way, should be banished or expelled from the city. My point was that Ukrainian culture should be elevated to a certain level to be equalized to those other cultures like Polish, Yiddish, and Russian, and Greek culture also, because one side of my family are Greeks, and I also found out it very late when I was already a teenager, and it was also a revelation because by then I decided that I was Ukrainian, and then out of nothing I discovered that I'm also a Greek. So it's always a challenge of self-identification, but it's important to understand that people in Odessa, they have this multicultural roots, and the loyalty to Ukrainian state, the loyalty to Ukrainian government, the loyalty and support of Ukrainian culture is enough in a civic society to preserve this culture, this place, and this state. So for me, the point was if we live in multicultural or cosmopolitan city, as we were taught, why we don't know other languages first? Why don't we know other writers, other people who were linked to Odesa in any other cultures. So this was my major plan, and I believe that there could be some point where they meet in this common space, and that this space would be enriched by all those incomers. So I think that we have a problem that war challenges our identity, or the identity of people who live in Odesa, that they speak, most of them speak and still speak Russian language. Some of them want to speak Russian despite any odds, and because they treat this language as their own. For myself, for instance, my feeling, I switched to Ukrainian language a long time ago when it wasn't fancy, It was very troubling process. I switched living in Odesa, and it caused a lot of trouble for me, and even aggression. So I'm very conscious of the challenges of switching into other language. But now, of course, when you switch into Ukrainian, it's quite fancy because you have a support of society, of the state, of everyone. So, but for me, for instance, I don't want my mom to switch into Ukrainian. I don't really want it, because this is my intimate language. I speak to her in Ukrainian, but I want she to speak to me in Russian, because it reminds me about my childhood. I know that she uses some words, very specific Odesa words, which are not Russian, obviously. So, it's quite a challenge, and I think that I don't think that there is an easy answer to this challenge. I think that that probably Ukraine should be caring also about those minor cultures which had their place in Odesa, as Greek, Yiddish, Polish, and others. And this probably would be a kind of agreement between different representatives of the different, let's say, groups of people or interests in Odesa. Because otherwise, I think that at this stage, if one of the cultures would be labeled as a major one, it can cause the more problem than there are now in Odesa.
Oleh, I want to come to you now and kind of think about these questions from your perspective. So you've done a lot of work curating, managing cultural programs in the Dream Theatre and in the film festival in Odesa. So I guess you know what people in Odesa are interested in culturally, what they want to consume. Are they interested in, what's your sense? What do the people in Odesa want to watch and to listen to and to read? Are they more interested in discovering Ukrainian culture? Are they interested, or how has the attitude towards Russian culture changed? Or are they more interested in international culture from all different parts of the world? What's your sense of the kind of cultural appetites and identities of people in Odesa?
That's a tricky question, to be honest. I would even prefer to answer about monuments or something.
You can talk about monuments if you want. It's fine.
What kind of monuments doesn't people love? But to be honest, I think I will start from part. To start, I would say that I think Odesa is kind of a hostage of the myth it had, which is, to my opinion, it's not alive anymore. And it's not alive anymore for a long time, even before 2014. This myth of multicultural city, it's in the past. It's myth of a city of a humor. It's so deadly in the past. It's a city which is really has a sophisticated taste. Again, it's kind of controversial, to be honest. But I don't want to be too harsh in Odesa. It's my favorite city, and I love it, and I see your good and bad, and I think I'm in love with it. And I can't say a dozen people are having one specific taste, and I can explain it and name all the factors, but I can speak to my audience, to people with whom I used to work, and try to continue this work through my initiative Porridge Festival, which we created with a group of local artists who are staying in Odesa and continue their work in culture, in museums, in art, and management of culture projects, and it's very important. And because of those people, we have hope, and we can expect changes, and changes also in Odesan's myth and perspective for Odesa. So I definitely can support the shift of interest in Ukrainian culture since 2014. As Oksana mentioned, that was the year when choices were made. Because I remember the huge, probably the biggest manifestation I've seen in Odesa in 2014 after occupation of Crimea, and that was the day when people were marching from the city center to the Russian embassy, saying Odesa is Ukraine, and it was mostly like in Russian language, but in Ukrainian as well. But I think that's the only one march I've seen so many different people, different ages from different neighborhoods. You cannot create any event or film screening or concert to have such a different audience as for that particular march, where all Odesan people kind of felt the need to put a statement. So since then, I spotted a shift, and for my audience, it was a huge shift to see and to know more about Ukrainian culture. For now, as you talked, I'm working as a DocuDays Film Festival, and I started to work as a documentaries that year, and we were organizing screenings of DocuDays Film Festivals in Odesa for some films. To be honest, we all know documentary is not the most popular type of films. But, and I remember for the first Ukrainian documentaries, we had like 10 or maybe 20 people in the screen. And then, slowly, but each year, we had more and more people, more and more young people who were studying in university or just finished. It was young professionals who were questioning and saying it was for literature. And today, there is a demand on this kind of events, but also there is a huge lack of resources in the city. And I think Odesa is going through troubles not only through the identity, but through the lack of care of this city, because it doesn't have enough venues which is well equipped and well protected. If I'm going back and trying to make a film screening, I can't find a screen in the city center with a bomb shelter, and it's for more than 50 people, for example. And it's the actual thing, how you cannot promote the culture, how you cannot make events like this and public discussions, and to have a feedback, to ask questions, to get difficult answers, and so on. But yeah, I think that the shift for Ukrainian culture, interest in it, and also in interest in developing it, in creating a product, because another part of that doesn't mean it's not only a city of sophisticated taste, but city of artists, people who make culture. And I think it's still there, the vibrant heart, the unusual, very specific type of questioning minds they're still living in Odesa, they're still creating a new culture which has to be supported, but the city itself is going through troubles, and of course war is the biggest challenge, but it's a lot of different areas where a city needs help, and creating to build a new myth, but I would prefer to build a new type of city culture. That's what we need.
And in terms of those, the cultural life in Odesa today, those artists you're talking about, how do they think about themselves? Do they think about themselves as Odesan artists first and foremost, or as Ukrainian artists? I mean, what's the relationship between the art scene, the culture scene in Odesa and the scene in Kiev and Lviv and Kharkiv and other places? Are they very interconnected, or is there a sense it's kind of still its own world in some ways?
I guess it was more isolated before the full-scale invasion. It was like thing very closed environment inside, but after the full-scale invasion, lots of people moved to different cities, went abroad, came back, melted, and other people arrived. So I think it's now it's more transition to different cities like Kyiv or Lviv. And to talk about that, I think Oksana can talk about the Serzel phenomena, the group of young artists, let's even call them a new wave of young artists who started to squat in an old factory building close to the seaside, and started to make their work studio there, and they were actually welcome in Kyiv as well, and Kievan artists went there to work as Odesan people. So this kind of phenomena, they were more isolated before the full-scale invasion. I think now it's a little bit different. It's very fragile, and I would say it's hard to speak on their name, but I would say they consider themselves Odesa Ukrainian artist.
Thank you. Julian, I'm going to come to you now. And speaking about Odesa as seen from inside and outside, you came to Odesa as an outsider, but I guess 30 years later, you're also an insider, I suppose. And you've seen it change. I imagine you've seen it change quite dramatically over all those years of visiting. And this is my question to you really, is how has your perception of Odesa changed? Because this is a place that you, as you said, you thought as a place on the other side of the world, this kind of magical place which really just kind of enchanted you, I guess. Through all these changes that have happened since then, are you still enchanted by Odesa in the same way? How is your feeling for the city change?
That's a really good question. The way you fall in love with anything or anyone is very different in the beginning to the way it then develops into living with that relationship and watching it develop. What's been very interesting hearing my fellow panelists is the way in which there's a sense that everything is in flux, that everything is to play for. And if you just look back at the beginning of the 18th century, the late 18th century city, and the city it's turned into now, you do see a tremendous evolution. I mean, the fact that it went from that booming 18th century neoclassical city, growing and growing throughout the 19th century to what it is today, in little over 200 years, is nothing short of amazing. And just to point out, the first two governors were French. The man who masterminded the city as Flemish. The man who took the city militarily was a Spaniard in Russian service. So you're talking about a city that already sort of got its first, if you like, its first impetus and impulse from this amazing outside influence, which then turned into an even bigger influence of or growth of an immigrant population in which practically every nation within touching distance was represented. And then I came along. In the mid-90s, just after Ukraine became independent, I had the best, I think, you might agree, the best opening view of the city you could have, landing at the sea station at the bottom of the Potemkin stairs and looking up and literally seeing the terrace, the boulevard at the top of the Potemkin stairs, Primorsky Boulevard, hanging as if sort of suspended in the sky, and it was like walking up into a dream. A dream that very quickly you became aware was a crumbling post-Soviet dream that was falling apart. But it's perhaps testimony to the extraordinary work of those who architected, built, the masons, the carpenters who built the city, that it hadn't actually completely fallen down over 74 years of Soviet rule. So there it was, this dream city that I then began to live with because I got married there. And I always rather liked the idea of the juxtaposition. I got married at the Opera House, next to the Opera House, the registry office, where you have to, of course, have an official civic wedding. And then the next day got married in the monastery opposite the main railway station, Pantone Monastery. And that kind of, in a way, encapsulates the kind of, I suppose, the spiritual and the temporal side of the city. And from then on, living in Moldavia, which I did for a year, and then visiting every year with the family, then going back when the time of the first invasion, marked a series of developments in my view of the city, my understanding of the city, which then really intensified greatly when I went back in the autumn of 2022 to live in the city when it was being attacked, its energy stations were being attacked, and it was under blackout for most of that winter. And partly that was I suppose that was an understanding of how Odessans lived that developed over 20 years between the time I got married and the time when I went back during the war. But also understanding the evolution of their relationships with themselves, which I found very moving and very touching, because it was clear that this was to me anyway, as an outsider, and it's nice as we call me an insider, but I still think I'm hovering on the edge. Not saying, please let me in, because that's not the problem. You were always allowed in. That's what Odesa was for. But thinking, can I really speak for the Odessans that I know? And all I can say is that I found a network of a range of views and a network of relationships that were very complex and changing, and definitely, as you I think nearly all said, definitely moving towards seeing Odesa as a heartfelt part of Ukraine, even while finding, I have to choose my words carefully because some of these people I'm talking about are family and friends, but finding it very difficult to come to terms with what Russia was doing, had done. I mean, we have to remember that when the war started in 2014, it was extremely difficult to get Ukrainians to use their rifles and shoot them in the direction of Russians. They didn't want to do it. They really did not want that. They didn't want to make that statement. They did not want to perform that action. And then later, I think one of the many unintended consequences of Putin's war has been that the city has swung much more wholeheartedly behind the idea of being not a Russia-leaning city within the state of Ukraine, but being a heartfelt part of Ukraine. And in a way, I wish I could get my in-laws back together again to tell me how they feel now. Both of them, unfortunately, are not able to. My mother-in-law died, and my father-in-law is in a home. But the very first thing that happened when the war started was that they stopped talking to each other. Because my mother-in-law was originally from Siberia, and my father-in-law was from Odesa with Moldovan ancestry. Obviously very close. And they did not talk to each other for 9 months because my mother-in-law felt that Putin was a strong man who was standing up for Russian speakers, whereas my father-in-law, who was actually he was rather a distinguished wheat scientist, which is obviously an important job in Ukraine, and he was utterly against what Putin was doing because he knew a land grab when he saw one. So they did not talk to each other for 9 months. And I visited them once during that period, and it wasn't easy. But I would love to be able to get them together now and say, what do you think? Because I feel that so many, particularly of that generation, the over 50s generation, have actually changed, and there's been this strong move towards perhaps not speaking Ukrainian, but knowing some Ukrainian, and definitely being wholeheartedly behind the idea of Odesa as being a Ukrainian city in a full and heartfelt sense.
Thank you so much for that answer. This brings me, I guess, to my last question for you guys before we open up the discussion. If you could tell me very, very briefly, because we want to give the audience as much time as possible for questions, how would you, I think it's important to talk about the war and the effect of the war on Odesa, because Odesa has been hit all the time. Almost every day you hear about some kind of attack. How would you define how this experience has changed Odesa going forward into the future? Julian, you see this kind of more firm movement towards a feeling of Odesa as being part of Ukraine and moving away from the so-called Russian world. But I wonder how you guys see that as well. Could you add anything to that about the effect of the war on Odesa? Maybe Odesan, I'll come back to you.
Yes, really, Odesa changed dramatically, and victim. From 2022, people in Odesa felt a very high level of solidarity, and it's very important. So Odesa, from the first days, united very noticeably. What is one more thing which we all didn't mention and which is important for me? During the full-scale invasion, Odesa felt, maybe for the first time in its history as Odesa, felt itself as a part of a wider region. And when we, in 2022, we waited if Russians will come, if they will conquer Odesa. And when Mykolaiv protected Odesa, it was the first time in Odesa's history when Odesa felt some other city as elder brother. And when taxi drivers in Odesa tell anecdotes about what is, we have auto numbers, these registration numbers on autos, VN, and it was such an anecdote, why we have in Odesa such numbers. It means near Mykolaiv, возле Mykolaiv. Such anecdote was absolutely impossible 5 years ago. And this feeling of brotherhood with Mykolaiv, with Kherson, half of Kherson is sitting in Odesa now, and the day of liberation of Kherson, November 11, it was a holiday, it was something, it was a feast. To imagine something like this 5 years ago, it was impossible. And for me, it's very important, I think, which is very fragile, really. We can easily come back, but if we will protect this new feeling, it will be great. And Odesa felt through all these things, it felt itself as a city between steppe and sea. Not as the city near sea, but between steppe and sea. And this experience of the silent port, experience of the first months of full-scale invasion, it was a dreadful experience, really. We can't imagine that port could be silent. And it was absolutely dreadful. And when the first bulkers came out of the port, so people stayed on the streets and cried when we listened this boom, this sound when a ship is going out of the port, and it was such an embodiment of this unifying of steppe, because these bunkers brought grain from Ukrainian steppe to the wider world. And it was so strong feeling that it seems to me that Odesa will not come back to this swamp in which it lived for a few decades.
Okay, fascinating. Thank you. Ivan, do you want to talk?
Started to think about the support. I would say that Odesa is going through a crisis, probably more than other cities in Ukraine, but that's definitely a crisis which is, can't say needed, but it brings hope and changes. And Odesa is figuring out herself, and one of the benefits, that lots of people people from different regions are coming to Odesa, bringing their stories, bringing their customs, bringing their attitudes. And it makes Odesa that vibrant city again, but in a different way, not in this imperialistic way. So you can find now in the city centre a fancy bar from Mariupol. That wasn't possible before, that no one would let and no one would do, actually. And now you can have this different people from Ukraine. So again, this established image of Odesa, special, not like the other cities, not a part of Ukraine. Now it's getting more and more. It's special, but in Ukraine, through these waves of people who come and go, stay, figuring out their new lives there. And I think for me, it's bringing hope.
Okay, thank you. Ivan, anything to
I don't feel that I'm in a position to judge because I no longer live in Odessa. I haven't been there for more than 3 years now. But what I can see from the distance is that I can feel that there is a switch, a change of the culture elites and culture and political elites in the city. That there was a group of people, gatekeepers, for a long time, for probably 3 to 4 decades. The same people were producing the same agenda, local culture policy, utilizing this notion of multiculturalism, the Odesan myth, and humor and all this stuff. And I feel that these people, not only they are outdated, but obviously they lost their power, their moral power also. So the question is who will come instead, and will be there people powerful, eligible, knowledgeable enough to construct this something new, and probably not necessarily new that would replace it entirely. The idea of multicultural city is not that bad. It's good, but it should be fulfilled with the materiality of culture, with the texture of culture, not only with the words. So I anticipate that probably these newcomers also, and it's also an interesting point that Oksana mentioned, that the Ukrainian thoughts is gathering now in Odesa, and it brings a new connection with the, let's say, core Ukraine. And so I feel that these newcomers and the new generation of people who are more pro-Ukrainian, I would just illustrate you just a short story. When I founded a film festival in 2010, I intentionally, I love silent films, always, but also one of my ideas was that I can screen their Ukrainian films without raising the conflict question of language, because silent film doesn't bring this question up, And this was my idea, that let's do this in a sophisticated, tender way. Let's invite people, show them Ukrainian films. Some of them were thinking that those films were Soviet or Russian. They were obviously Soviet, but Ukrainian Soviet. So for a lot of people, it was kind of revelation. But during the first years of the existence of the festival, it was quite a challenge, to face some aggression even against this idea that those films were Ukrainian. Why you call those films Ukrainian if they are Russian? And blah blah blah. So there were a lot of problems around the festival. But still, I remember that it was, in a way, like a premonition, like a prehistory of the city becoming more Ukrainian, because I agree that it switched entirely in favor of Ukraine in 2014. But before that, there was still a process, and this process took quite a time. I belonged also to the circles of Ukrainian or Odesan contemporary art scene in 2000, early 2000, and I also remember this switch because they were very pro, let's say not even pro-Russian, but pro-Moscow, because those people usually went to Moscow to fulfill their artistic ambitions, and then gradually with the time, let's say after 2004, in these circles, after Orange Revolution, they started identifying themselves as Odesa Ukrainians. And there are some people and figures there who were crucial in, in bringing this idea of Odessa, of belonging Odessa to Ukraine. And also, so the problem is not, when I was speaking about those gatekeepers, they used this, idea of if they had a local Bible, local literature Bible, and they were taking care of it. But now they are no longer, so they were our enemies, even for my generation, because we hate all those people. We wanted to write in Ukrainian. I was publishing a Ukrainian literature magazine, and Natasha also, my fellow co-editor 20 years ago, and it was also quite a challenge during this time. So we also hated those people, but we couldn't imagine that one day they would leave us for good. So I guess also, so the fact that people are coming into the city is not the problem. I think the problem usually always has been that people will leave in. But also for Jabotinsky, who is the founder of Zionism, he said that Odessa has always been the place to live. So the place where people gathered in order to live. So it was a point of departure. So it's probably, maybe it's not such a big problem, So the generation, people, cultures, they changed constantly, but Odessa remains somehow.
Okay, thank you so much. So unless Julian will add anything, maybe I'll go to the floor.
Can I just add one thing to what Ivan was saying about the tone and the mood in which these discussions take place in Odessa? Because I remember just one anecdote, and it stayed with me. And I was having dinner with some family and friends in November 2022, in the middle of the blackout. A dinner of raki, which is crayfish, which is Odessa speciality, sweet delicious. And a little bit of an argument developed about President Zelensky. There's a kind of feeling that he shouldn't have let it happen. There are all sorts of, little negative feelings that people can have, which are usually their way of earthing their own frustrations and fears. Anyway, and I obviously see what President Zelensky has done from afar and regard him with a great deal of admiration. And one or two very dignified silences fell at certain moments during this conversation. And I was very worried by the end of the evening that I'd offended one or two people around the table. And as I left with my takeaway of yet another pot of raki to take back to my hotel and eat, the woman whose flat it was, we'd been having dinner in, I said, I hope I didn't offend anybody. She said, no, nobody was offended. it was absolutely fine. Everybody can say what they think. And I think that that's something that I've always been conscious of in Odessa. That freedom and that tolerance.
Good. Yeah, here's to that. So, and in that spirit, let's open the floor to questions from the audience who can ask us whatever they like. So I don't know if we should, maybe we can, should I give you this microphone to pass around? Yeah. Okay, so, hands up. Okay, so I saw Marina first. Yeah.
Thank you for this amazing discussion. I recently took part in an event about Jewish Odessa. It was part of the Jewish Book Week, and the event was linked to a book about Odesan Jews. And there was one very interesting piece of research where it was said that young Jews of Odessa are now being closely involved into multiple Jewish charities coming from Israel and the United States. And they develop a new kind of identity, which is sometimes quite heavily religious. And there's a gap developing between older generation Odesan Jews who are culturally connected to Russian culture, Russian-speaking, and also perhaps this kind of Soviet nostalgia, and these young Jews, and eventually they are kind of being groomed to leave Odessa. It was mentioned that Odessa is a place to leave. So how would you comment? Do you see it as a problem in terms of building this new Odessa where various minorities are, their voices are heard? When you see this, new generation of Odessa Jews being kind of less invested into the future of their city?
Okay, so this is a book by Marina Sapritsky-Nahum, about the Jewish Odessa, a very interesting book about contemporary Jewish identity in Odessa. So I don't know if anyone would like to touch on that question.
Maybe if I understand right, yes, the question. Maybe the Jewish community has the same development as other communities in Odessa, and that's why the older generation have some resentment to Moscow and so on. It seems to me that it would be great in context of Jewish community of Odessa. It would be great to develop such understanding in Odessa culture, in Odessa collective memory, that Odessa is a cradle of one of the cradles, of Jewish state idea, and it's a cradle of Zionism. And regrettably, this moment is somewhere on margins of collective memory in Odessa, and it's very pity, really. And now, what is great is for me that the names of prominent actors of Jewish culture in Odessa come back on the map, for example, and it's one more example of how Odessa lost its multicultural nature, because when the street was named after Mendeleev Forum, it's a father of Jewish literature. People in Odessa said, "What? How to pronounce these? Let's find something more easy." Yes, and it's a problem in Odessa. If I understand right the question, maybe somebody will. Thank you.
Yeah, I agree that that's a problem in Odessa, but I lived for 1 year in Los Angeles, and I was involved in this, volunteer initiatives, and a lot of them were supported by Jewish people, not necessarily from Odesa, but those who came from Kharkiv, Kiev. They also, in a way, dissolved into this Odesa, Brighton Beach-like mythology, and also they really feel themselves belonging to Odesa, maybe more than to their native city, which is surprising. And so they were invited into, so there was an event, a concert, and they were invited, it was their initiative, but they commissioned a program to Ukrainians, let the Ukrainians do the songs, performance, and whatever. And there were some songs like Червона Калина, which is in a way could be treated as nationalistic, and I was afraid that that this song sang in before the Jewish people could cause some problems. But I was really surprised that they started singing, and they supported this song, and they were super happy. So my feeling was that they also appropriated a lot of modern days Ukrainian political mythology, and like Zelensky is their huge hero now. So I feel that even though Odesa itself and people who live in Odesa may be not that knowledgeable about their Jewish culture heritage, but those who left Odesa and who live outside Odesa, they very much aware about that. So they link their local culture identity with Odesa cultural identity, and it's very interesting and important. But one anecdote from my family, just to give you an idea about the fluidity of identities in Odesa back then, in 1960s. So, husband of my grandmom had a sister, and they were living in Moldavanka also, and she was married to Polish guy, and he had name and surname very similar to Jewish. So he went, he was seeking a job, and he found a job at the Fruit, I don't know how to translate, the warehouse for vegetables, yeah. So there was a deficit for such kind of goods in Soviet times, and it was a big privilege to work at this place because you could corruptedly, spread those goods among your family and your friends, so on. So, but those places were mostly Jewish people were working in those places, and he came there, and his name was Zhenya Yereshevich, and he said that I'm Zhenya Yereshevich and I want to work here. And they started speaking to him in Yiddish because they were thinking that he was Jew. And he decided not to reveal the truth. He learned Yiddish, and his entire life he was using this language as his native language at the work, of course, not at home, but still. So it's such a, I think it's such a good illustration about the idea of being Odesan. It's not about even your origins, not that much about your origins, but about something that you share with others. And you can share. Today you can share Ukrainian language. Yesterday you were sharing the other language, the tradition, and anything that is common to others. This is something that people really cherish, I guess.
Yeah, very Odesan story. Yeah, also.
Can we, so changing the subject a little bit, because I know that Alexander, this is something that you know a lot about. Can you tell us, and now I've been reminded that I think Odessa is glamorous because of all those cool bars that have moved to Mariupol. Anyway, amazing. The buildings, and not just the monuments, because I know you've written a lot about problems with looking after the older buildings, and local politics has been arguably irresponsible, although sometimes in quite an amusing way. I love the story about the mayor letting people dig up the Warsaw Boulevard to find Turkish remains underneath. I think that was really good. Personally, I think that was really important. Anyway, please can you tell us a bit about building politics in the city and what you hope for in terms of preservation of heritage and in terms of exciting new architectural initiatives, maybe something.
Very complicated questions.
Whichever
the new architectural initiatives is better not to implement, yeah, because it's something dreadful. Let's speak about it's a very sad question, really. I don't want to speak about it because sometimes now we are happy we have a war. We can say, oh, it was a missile strike, but in the center of Odesa we have buildings which had fallen before the full-scale invasion. And okay, they stay, and now we can invite our foreign colleagues, and they say, what a problem, the Russians ruined half of the cities, and okay, I will. So now the situation is the same as 5 years ago, and now after the obtaining all these status, all the UNESCO heritage, people now have problems how to renovate their flats, their houses after the missile strikes, really. Because city government said them, you can't touch this. They say, we have a hole in the ceiling. What to do? We will think. Wait a couple of days, a couple of months. So the situation is not so good. I'm very optimistic when I speak about the solidarity, regional identity, and all other things. But in context of architecture, it's something dreadful. Yeah.
Okay, Yulia, I think I saw you next. Over here, at the front.
Hi, Yulia Russian, political economist. It's lovely to see her. I'm really fascinated by the story of Odesa, and I think, it's painful to see what's happening to Odesa. Every day because of shelling and everything else, but you know that. The stories and history of Odessa and the dynamism of the place, and these exchanges and the politics of memory in and of Odessa and by Odessans elsewhere is quite fascinating in and of itself. But I also think, and I want to ask you to comment on this, whether you think it could serve as a form of lesson to learn for the new myth-making of collective Ukraine in and post-war. Because the power of collective myth-making is not just in remembering what actually happened, which is extremely important, and this is why the work that you are doing is so important, but it's also in the forgetting, in the letting go of past grievances of those who came before us, if we want to build something together for the future. With, of course, reasonable reckoning and putting some things behind. So when I hear stories about how Odessans in New York think of Odessa and Israel, and I've met quite a few of them, and not all of them are as kind at letting you express all your opinions. But it's this kind of connection to the place and creating a story about it that is looking into the future with a warm feeling about the past. I think it's something that could be quite interesting. So how much hope do you see in that ability to gather the best and go into the future? Thank you.
Okay, would you like to comment on that?
Can I just say one short anecdote about this connection with the Odessa of the past? After I was living in Moldavanka in 2001 when 9/11 happened, and when I went back to Odessa the following spring, I was really struck by the number of, I imagine, Manhattanites standing on street corners, going in and out of buildings, sitting in restaurants. Completely different little new layer of demographic had been overlaid on the Odessa demographic, and without making a specific detailed survey, I felt fairly certain that these were, I knew they were Americans from hearing it, but I felt fairly certain that they had once had a connection with Odessa and were coming back. And I did ask one or two property agents about this. They said, yes, the city is full of New Yorkers who have come back to look and see if Odessa could be a sanctuary for them now that they feel so fearful in New York, which I thought was a very interesting historical turnaround, since they probably thought of Odessa because they had ancestry from Odessa, certainly have.
Thank you, Julian. I want to add a few words, if I understand the question right. First of all, I would like to note that I think that's the first panel, as far as I know, in URL that had so many anecdotes. Some youth probably still alive. And about the memories and this collective myth creating, what I would love to emphasize, and again, this process started not in 2022 and much earlier. And what I love, and I would love to see more in Odessa, it's also digging deep and remembering things, like going in the past and looking for this complicated past and looking at it from the different optics. And it started with also a younger generation of artists and researchers, and we have a Jewish cemetery, which for a long time for lots of Odesan people were like unknown toponym on the map, and now we more and more turning our gaze to it. We have a Cossack cemetery not far from Odessa, which was known for a few group of people, and a young generation of artists digitalized those crosses, created some art projects, and drew lots of attention to this part of our past. And this collective research and hunger for interesting part, forgotten part of our past, complicated, and I would love to see it more and more, and also to see it in different directions, for example, Bulgarian, Romanian, Greek, and many, many others which we have. And in this case, if we're going to have these researchers, if we're going to bring them back, we can claim our multicultural image as well, because we had all of those people, and they're still, but they lost this vibrant visibility. Yes, that's what would be an interesting process, and Odessa can definitely started and have been ahead of it.
Absolutely. So I think we're already over time, but we have time for one more very concise and brief question. No anecdotes, please. Yes, Erica.
hopefully I won't offend with this question. Another part of the mythology of Odesa seems to have to do with criminality. So if you push freedom and all the things talked about, a point for arrival and departure, it's also got a criminal, intense criminal mythology surrounding it. Is that more of a Soviet thing, or does sort of criminal anecdote also form part maybe of the sort of current future part of the city, or is it best to move on from that kind of mythologizing?
It's a positive note. It's a positive note.
When I start to answer this question, I always say that Odesa is a sister city to Marseille, and we can end the conversation. But I think the criminal background, it's not the Soviet, no. It started much earlier, and I guess, and I think Oksana can evaluate on it much better, that the seaport, it's always a place of this kind of activities, criminal, semi-criminal, you have to be flexible. And of course our famous mayor.
Really, if we speak about this floor of criminal Odesa, we can say thank you to Babel, who created this image, and regrettably, due to the absence of Jabotinsky in the common space, we left only with Moldovan, Kabinia Creek, and so on and so forth. That's why really, when we spoke about Babel, but for people in Odesa for last decades, Babel was a figure of rejection because he is guilty in domination of these. It's not his guilt really, because he was the other side of the other pole. From one side is Jabotinsky with opera theater, Derivassovskaya and so on, and Babel took the other place, but it's not his guilt that only this space left in our common collective memory and our mythology.
I would like to protect Babel because I don't think that he is one to blame of criminal whatever of Odesa, because Sonka Zolotaya Ruchka, it's a myth that that was invented in 1900s. It was already there was already a film filmed in 1912 on this criminal topic. Even not a film, a series content of some, what I don't know, 10 or 11 series. So the very idea that Odesa is a port city gives the explanation why it happened. But also it's been always a huge trade center, even during the Soviet time, and especially in 1990s. So we had a biggest open air market near the city called 7 kilometers. Yeah, so it was quite a thing, not only due to criminal doings or deeds that were there, but also it brought a kind of new idea of commerce. Because in Ukraine in the early 90s, the idea of commercial entrepreneurship wasn't that popular due to Soviet, legacy. So Odesa was one of the major cities where the commerce started flourishing, maybe even earlier than in other cities, maybe after Kiev. So it also gives an idea about these 1990s. And also there is there's a myth, a Russian myth about 1990s called Lihiv, like a moody 90s that is very threatening time with the killings, with the corruption, with everything, blah blah blah. But also in Ukrainian mythology, as I can see it now, the 1990s become a period of freedom, it's unlimited freedom because the state institutions were not working yet. They were just established. So there were no state protection, and this is why it was threatening, but also there was no state intervention. And it's a period that some people in Odesa also take Muratova, Kira Muratova, a greatest Ukrainian filmmaker, made a focus of their body of work, because Muratov was very much into this 1990s topic of becoming free and what freedom, brought to those people who were not free, who didn't know what is it to be free. And also the last point for me is that I think that it was also touching this topic of freedom that Odesa has it. And I think that it's something that connects Odesa to Ukraine, because Russia can't bring freedom. And this is something in the very core of this culture, of Russian culture. There is slavery, there is no freedom in it. And the way that Odesa used to live as a free city makes for it a destiny to be a part of Ukraine, not for Russia. And I think that more and more people started understanding that there is no other way other than to be within and with Ukraine, because it brings us freedom.
Thank you so much, Ivan, for bringing us from criminality to freedom. Thank you so much to Julian, Ivan, Oksana for such a rich discussion. Julian has some books at the back of the hall. If you'd like to buy one and get it signed, please do so. And as I said before, I highly recommend it. And in the meantime, does UIL want to plug anything in particular?
Perhaps the recording will be available soon, so share it.
Yeah, the recording of the event will be available, so if you enjoyed it so much that you want your whole family to watch it, you can spread it. Okay, and yeah, keep an eye on your